Welcome, everybody, to Unboxing Special Collections, in which we present and discuss historical documents and publications from the NC State University Library's Special Collections Research Center. Today, we're welcoming you to a new season, and at the end of today's session, I'll talk to you about some future unboxing special collections. But today we're going to explore some of the post-World War II maps that we have of the NC State University campus, and we have those in the university archives, which is part of the special collections. So to start off with introductions, I am joined today by Burak Erdim, and he is an associate professor of architecture in the College of Design here at NC State University. And if you want to say a little bit about what you do and what you research.
Sure. Thank you, Todd.
Sure.
And thank you for inviting me to look at these post-war maps together. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I really enjoyed your first talk about the earlier campus, and so really thrilled to be able to join that conversation during, from the 1940s onwards, campus discussion. As a professor of architecture and architectural history, part of my research involves the professionalization of the architect and the engineer. So the development of technical universities, both here in the United States and abroad, involves a central part of my research. So happy to be able to contribute
Great.
To the discussion. Yeah.
Well, welcome, and I'm very excited to have you here. Burak and I have already been discussing some of these maps, and I think we're going to have a great discussion today. So let me introduce me. I am Todd Kosmerick. I'm the University Archivist here at NC State University, and I'm based in the Special Collections Research Center of the NC State University Libraries. And in the University Archives, we are collecting, preserving, and making accessible all kinds of documentation on the history of NC State University. Kind of behind the scenes here, behind the camera, if you will, we've got some help today. Virginia Ferris is going to be handling the chat. She's the lead librarian for outreach and engagement, one of my colleagues in special collections. And then we have Arian from another unit in the library. he's handling all the technology here, the cameras, the streaming platform, all that stuff. It takes a village to do what we're going to do today. Yeah. So let's get started. First of all, I want to tell you that most of the maps that we'll be looking at today came to us in the university archives from the Office of the University Architect, and we've been collecting maps and building plans from them for decades now. And we thank them for recognizing the historical importance of these older maps and building plans, and for thinking to transfer them to the university archives. So we appreciate that. Again, it takes a village to do what we do to preserve and make accessible these materials. So let's get started with our first map, which we have already laid out here. This is a map of the NC State University campus in 1975. And I just first wanted to point out in the previous stream that Virginia Ferris and I did last February, and she's going to put in the chat the link to that, we covered mostly the older part of campus, which would be this area kind of up in here. This is Hillsborough Street. This is Pullen Road. For those of you who are familiar with NC State and with Raleigh, Holiday Hall is here. That was the first building on campus. And, the campus kind of grew from that point, going west and going south. And then up until World War II, it mostly stopped right in here, what is now Broughton Drive. There were a few other buildings out here, but it mostly stopped at that point in time. But we wanted to start off with this. This is kind of like the map of the end of the time period we're going to be talking about here, because it kind of shows from, what is kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about in some of the other maps. By the 1970s, well, in the early days of the university, it was a haphazard kind of growth. There was a master plan created for the university in the 1920s, but that kind of seems to have fallen by the wayside by the 1930s. And we get to World War II, and then after World War II, and it's still kind of haphazard growth. But by the 1960s, and especially the 1970s, there's kind of a more conscious effort to create a university. And Burak, you've talked about it as, kind of conceptualizing the campus as a single thing, but with these kind of multimodal centers. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I mean, the NC State campus that we know of today is described as a multinodal campus of multiple neighborhoods and paths. And it has certainly become that, especially with the establishment of the Centennial campus on the south side across Western Avenue and so on. So, however, it wasn't always a multinodal campus, and today I think we're going to be talking about, at a particular period of time, the immediate post-World War II period, when NC State was being shaped around, largely around a singular academic core, much like many other post-war campuses around the United States and the world at this time. Why this interest in a central academic core is an important question that we'll get into as we look at a variety of drawings and maps today. I do want to add here that, so this is not only a key period in the development of NC State's history and identity and growth during that period after World War II, but it also begins to reveal regional and national ideals and anxieties about trends in education and social and economic development at that time. So, so I think this is like you said, Todd, this map begins to show the end of that, the growth of the campus until about the 70s, and when the campus is beginning to feel its growth pains, if you will, and that idea of a central core, mainly around the Brickyard in this area here, is beginning to no longer really hold together.
Right.
Beginning to bust at the seams.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, and
Thing to pause real quick, Todd, sorry. I think your mic is a little close to your shirt. We just got a couple comments.
Oh, this one?
You're good.
oh, okay.
Oh, this one?
Rock's good, but Todd, I think your mic is. Ryan, do you have any suggestion about?
Okay.
Hold on, we'll go to be right back.
Pause.
All right.
Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. I was having issues with my microphone, but hopefully those are fixed now. So hopefully you can hear me well. I think I was about to say, you can see from this map, like I said, this area through here was the campus up until about World War II, and then, for the 30 years after World War II, it's like explodes way over to here because, the student population really grows during that time. The university is really kind of making a concerted effort to be a research university. So there's a lot of laboratories and kind of places where experiments and research is being done. Athletics is a big deal. And so, it just grew and grew and grew during this time period. And so the university needed to figure out some way to kind of manage that growth going forward. And so, by the end of the time period we're going to talk about today, we're starting to see, new master plans and new ideas about, how to organize, kind of physically organize the campus.
Yes.
Okay, is there anything else you want to say about this map before we go on to the next one?
Not on this one, but we can augment what's going on here with some of those aerial views. Okay.
So bear with us.
Everyone can keep the image of this map on their minds.
Right. We're going to pull that map out and pull this other document in. And this isn't a map per se, but it does have maps in it. So before I open it up, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this document. It's a flip pad, really. Somebody could flip the pages over. And so, we don't know precisely what its purpose was, but, it appears that it was for some kind of a presentation.
Wonderful.
Let's zoom in on it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Are we on pause?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I think maybe, should I try it? Because
If you want.
if you don't mind.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's... How about this, guys?
Does this sound better?
Just too high? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good to
I
go?
think, should we give this a try? I think this is going to
Yeah, try again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just pick up where you left off.
Yeah, okay. Okay, sorry about that, everybody on the viewing. My microphone still keeps, we're trying to get that placed right. Okay, we're going to talk about this flip pad. Ariane, would you be able to zoom in on it? Again, takes a village to do what we do. That's good. Okay, so this flip pad was for some kind of presentation. It's a really interesting document, though, because it's got these two parts to every page. There's like the upper part, which is an aerial photograph of campus, and then the lower part, which actually is a map and shows you the area on campus that aerial photograph covers. So we've opened it to the first page here, which is the early part of campus. I'm going to go back to the photograph. You got the bell tower there. You've got Holiday Hall there. You've got Watauga Hall, Winslow Hall, Primrose there, Peel. Off in the distance, that's the nuclear reactor there. This is the I call it the State College smokestack. This is Hillsborough Street. That's the railroad tracks. So those are some of the landmarks to orient you. A lot of it hasn't changed, but some of it has changed quite a bit. Like this, if you are looking at that and saying, gosh, that looks like a football stadium, well, you are correct. That was Riddick Stadium, which existed up until 1965. And I forgot to mention this, this flip pad, we think dates from 1959. So there was a football stadium before Carter Finley Stadium. It was called Riddick Stadium, and it was here on campus. And today, that space is now occupied by Sass Hall and the parking lot that's to the east of Sass Hall. We've heard stories from alumni that used to live in like Syme Hall, and they could watch the games out in the field there, which is kind of cool.
Yes.
That's and that's the map that kind of shows the area. Holiday Hall. There's this football stadium there, Hillsborough Street, the railroad tracks there. And kind of going off to the west there. Did you, was there anything you wanted to say about this?
Absolutely. Todd, I think this is such a wonderful document you have.
I think so too, yeah.
Special collections, documenting this period. I think the views and the aerial photographs showing particular parts of the campus points to this conscious effort to try to get a whole view of the whole university, to kind of get intentionality behind trying to understand the campus as a whole. So this booklet tries to sort of document what there is at this stage of the university, and then in order to be able to, I think about what might happen next. I think the use of aerial photography is significant in this case to augment the plans and drawings as a way of understanding the campus as a whole and its buildings. As an urban campus, and can kind of think back to the first drawing that we looked at as well. As an urban campus, NC State provides a unique case. It had considerable land to grow, as many other urban campuses didn't have.
When it started in 1887, it was out in the middle of the country.
But also managing that growth without losing the idea of a cohesive whole becomes one of the primary concerns, I think, throughout the history of NC State. So I think this document, I think, kind of marks a point, the late 1950s, when the university is trying to capture, its holdings and where things are, and to kind of get a sense of what things look like from this aerial perspective as a way to try to plan its future. So.
Yeah, I mean that's that's interesting to think about. The 20th century, being the century when people could really start flying. I mean, I knew there were balloons before then, but airplanes, pretty much being invented at the beginning of the 20th century, and people like kind of figuring out what can we do with airplanes, Well, obviously you're going to transport people in airplanes, but at some point somebody figured out, oh, we can take pictures down on the ground, and then we can use those pictures to kind of really kind of get a better sense of what's happening down there and what we want to do down there. So that kind of new technology, kind of becomes integrated into the way things get designed then, right?
Yeah, it's a way of, it's a particular way of viewing the landscape from this, position of power, if you will.
Right, yeah.
Like to be able to control that much land, people didn't have that perspective prior to, the invention of first balloons and then airplanes through which they could take these kinds of photographs.
Yeah,
Early balloons were also, with the invention of photography, we find first use of aerial photography out of hot air balloons, essentially, through which to document cities, a perspective that we didn't have before. Prior to that.
And then, I think the other thing about the 20th century is we developed these methods of mechanical reproduction of things, and so, it's no longer that expensive to make this kind of a picture anymore. Exactly. And you can make 500 copies of it if you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the same, with these maps too, especially, there were these things called mimeographs that you could reproduce things on, but then the photocopy machine, I think by the end of the 1960s, that becomes
replaces
becomes a common way of reproducing things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like the way that these drawings show like the extents to of the photograph, in plan. So this correlation between this plan view and perspectival view.
Yeah, like we were saying, this is a really interesting document. There's several pages in this document. There was one more that we wanted to kind of touch base on, so let me flip to that one.
Yeah.
Which, let's see, 1, 2. It's this one, I think.
Right. This area.
Yeah. So again, this is we think it's 1959. This is Hillsborough Street through here. This is the railroad tracks through there. This is the nuclear reactor here. This would be what was the D.H. Hill Junior Library at the time, which is today the East Wing of that library. This was the Student Union, which later became the Erdal Cloyd Wing of the library, because the towers of the library were built in between those two buildings. This is Scott Hall, which was built for actually the pretty new poultry science program at that time. This is Kilgore Hall, which was built originally for the forestry program. Later, horticultural science moved in there, but originally it was where forestry was at. Gardner Hall was built here, originally for botany, I think. Williams Hall is here, originally built for agronomy. Later that became crop sciences and soil sciences. So there's a lot of agricultural and life science offices and research laboratories in this area, as well as classrooms. You can kind of see, like, off the back of Williams Hall, there's greenhouses, and it's kind of off, out of frame, but I can tell you there were a lot of greenhouses just to the west of this area, too. This is Broughton Hall, which was mechanical and aerospace engineering, was in there. And so all those buildings that I've just now talked about were built after World War II, in the late 1940s and 1950s. So you can see there's like already a lot of development happening. This grassy space here is where the brickyard would be developed, not quite 10 years after this photograph was taken. So before it was the brickyard, it was just an open grassy space. But you can see that we're even on the edge of it. There were still like greenhouses for, some kind of horticultural or botanical research right there.
Yeah, so I want to contrast what's going on here on this new part of the campus with the early part of the campus that you and Virginia covered in the first.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Actually, Todd, if we could flip back to this image just briefly.
Yeah, we can move up to the.
So that view.
Or do you want the picture photo?
Yeah. The chancellor's office and the Court of Carolina there and everything. So what we're seeing there is a typical early organization of a land-grant institution, or what has been called the working man's school, or what a scholar of American campuses, Paul Turner, has referred to as the democratic college. So with various academic and residential buildings laid out in a picturesque manner with curving or diagonal paths connecting them. So following the landscape planning ideals of A.J. Davis or A.J. Downing, the well-known landscape designer, horticulturist, and who has been considered as the founder of American landscape architecture. So you might be surprised to know that the National Mall in Washington, D.C. was originally designed in the same manner before the arrival of the City Beautiful movement, of course, that shaped the National Mall in its current conceptualization. So as we go to the sort of the post-war part of the campus, we can kind of flip back to that, in terms of the arrangement of the buildings and spaces in relation to each other.
Yeah, here we go.
And this area is really of central importance to our discussion today as the post-war campus. Here we see all the key components of what NC State was becoming as a major research university during this period. Here we also see the conscious effort to build a central academic core around which all of the key pieces of a modern university would be placed. So looking at that, so what's worth noting here is the creation of a formalized, rectangular, well-defined social and academic center, as opposed to the picturesque layout of the earlier campus, if you will, that, with the arrangement of the various academic and dormitory buildings and so on in relation to each other. So the creation of the social core is also replacing, pushing aside some of the greenhouses and labs that used to be located in the zone. So this, the creation of a space takes priority over some of these working areas and research areas of the campus. So, so what's so important about creating this kind of open lawn, which then becomes the brickyard? So the main library, the HL, which then also will get its stacks pretty soon, and so on, is of course of the primary feature of this ensemble, and then the various disciplines and classroom buildings that are grouped around what would become the brickyard in this area. So, however, there is also another key piece, as you mentioned, a newcomer to the idea of the post-war campus, the appearance of the idea of the student union.
Yes.
And this is actually a new thing. This might be kind of like a fairly old news. We have just a new one right now.
Right. Yeah.
But this was really kind of a newcomer to the American campus, and it's had to serve a number of key responsibilities. First of all, in terms of its positioning on the NC State campus, it was to act as a gateway, between the city and the campus, and to make the post-war university seem more accessible and to the broader population. And so that's why the building has these two doors and a stair that begins to connect Hillsborough Street with the interior court of this social and academic core. So it has those two doors, and the library, we just recently reopened those two doors to kind of reinvigorate that function of as a connection piece between the city and the campus. But this also brings us to my second point, and that is the building has to be seen as an extension of the Brickyard, and it was the function in relation to that as a place of socialization and interdisciplinary exchange for students and faculty, and celebration of the coming together of the humanities and the scientific fields, where you would hold certain cultural events and programs, showing of films or exhibitions of scientific or artistic artifacts in the space. So this is a central idea operating here that, and very important to this notion of a new modern post-war university. Because in the immediate post-war period and in the aftermath of the rise of fascism in Europe and the American use of the atomic bomb on civilians, there was a central discussion among American intellectuals and educators about the need to humanize technical education, to create spaces to develop habits of interdisciplinary exchange, a social reintegration of the various disciplines, and spaces where sciences and the humanities could come together. So Erdal Cloyd is the first student union and the Brickyard work in hand here to try to create that kind of a space. So for instance, while the nuclear engineering lab is being built, just southeast of that space, and now this space is, its function is to kind of bring that nuclear power generation possibilities, but to kind of raise the question, okay, what are some ethical ways of trying to use that energy? Other campuses, for instance, MIT, was doing the very same kinds of things with an inclusion of a student union, kind of civic gathering places and concert halls in relation to a central academic core like this. But also, we can ask the question of what's included here and what's not. Because when we look at some of the other campuses, for instance, at MIT, they also included the well-known MIT chapel as part of this ensemble. And NC State doesn't have a chapel, a multi-denominational chapel or anything like that here. And that's curious. That's what some comparisons reveal, what's there, what's not.
So actually there was a chapel.
Okay, there you go. Okay, interesting. Okay, so
And interestingly, so the Erdal Cloyd is the first student union on campus, but before it existed, there was a YMCA on campus.
Okay.
And that was actually where your offices were, over there at Camp Evner Hall.
Okay.
That building was torn down in the 70s, and Camp Evner Hall was built there. And so there was a chapel in the YMCA.
Okay.
But you're right. It did not get built into the new
part of it.
the new union.
So
and so that kind of religious connection that had been there starts to loosen up. I guess you could say.
The ethical dimensions of arts, sciences, and religion on campus. It's interesting. So that's why I always like comparisons, because they kind of reveal, you can understand what's there, but it also reveals sometimes what's not there.
Right.
And so on. you know,
Yeah,
so.
Well, that
Yeah.
was great. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I hate to cut us short, but
Sure,
we've
sure.
got a lot
Yeah,
more maps
we have,
to go over.
So no, that was it. That was kind of what I wanted to cover
Okay.
in relation to those two, you know, in terms of the growth of the campus and bringing together of the various disciplines around
Yeah.
that core.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the Union is a real interesting place.
Yeah.
A lot used to go on in there.
Yeah.
You know, the theater performances went on in there. You know, the dances went on in there. You talked about the exhibits. It wasn't called the Craft Center, but there was a place in there that you could do that kind of, you know, you could, you know, they would teach you about, you know, creating crafts, pottery, whatever.
The Makers Lab.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we
Yeah.
we have, you know, we have the makerspace now.
Makerspace, yeah,
And
yeah.
yep, we need to zoom out. Sorry, those of you in our viewing audience.
This one, yeah.
Actually, can we zoom out a little more? Is that it?
Or maybe showing,
We may need to just
move it
That's
up.
it. Okay.
We can move it maybe that way a
We're
little
gonna
bit.
have to.
Here, if we do it
Let's
together.
see
or we
where
have to-
we want Toddville
Remove
here.
some
I think
of
we're
the
gonna have to
weight.
roll.
Right. Okay.
This map is huge, as you may be getting a sense of. I think that's good. And so we can only show you a portion of it. But very prominently there, you can read the word Trailwood. So this map is from 1948. I wanted to show this map because it kind of documents some of the growing pains that the university was experiencing right after World War II. The landmarks I wanted to point out aren't there anymore. So anyway, if you can see my hand going up off the screen there, that's Hillsborough Street. And then far off that way is the railroad tracks. And kind of over in this area, going that way would be the Brickyard. And then it's
We can.
just the corner. Here is part of Nelson Hall, and I think this is probably off the screen, but that down here is David Clark Labs. So we're talking about a space that would later become occupied by Kilgore Hall and Scott Hall and Gardner Hall and the Phytotron and Marianne Fox Laboratory, all that space. Up until World War II was open space. And then after World War II, there was a sudden influx of students. And the reason that was because the U.S. government, to kind of, you know, compensate, I guess you could say, all the people who'd gone into the military to fight the war, the U.S. Congress passed the GI Bill, and that provided these wonderful benefits to veterans that included the government would pay for you to go to college if you were a veteran of World War II. So a lot of people availed themselves of this opportunity at NC State, but really across the country. And this, you know, is really kind of a catapults higher education in the United States way forward from where it had been before World War II. Because there's just, you know, all of a sudden millions and millions of more people going to school in the country. At NC State, just to give you a sense of kind of what was happening in terms of the numbers. We were still a very small school. Before World War II, the highest our enrollment had ever gotten was around 2,500. In 1946, it doubled to over 5,000. And then a few years after that, it grew a little bit more to 5,500. So by today's numbers, when we've got about 36,000 students attending here. 5,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think of it as doubling the campus, size of the campus in just a few short years, that's a big strain. That puts a big strain on the physical infrastructure of the campus. So where were all those people going to live? And many of those veterans coming to school here had gotten married and were starting families at the same time they were getting their education. So one solution to that is the university set up temporary housing, and in one place they really created a trailer park. And it was in this space covered by this map. And so Trailwood, if you take the word trailer and cut off the ER from it and add wood to it, that's why it was called Trailwood. And so there's these little lanes that were kind of platted out, and trailers were put on each of those spaces, and that's where some of these married veterans lived with their families. And Virginia, I think, is going to put in the chat a link to some of the photographs we have of Trailwood.
Yeah, that's great.
Also, there was other kind of constructed housing that was built up here, just kind of up off the top of this map. They were called the UK units. I'm still trying to figure out what UK was short for. I'm guessing United Kingdom. I'm thinking these were some kind of temporary housing that we shipped over during the war to the United Kingdom. And after the war, they probably weren't brought back here. There was probably just a surplus of it here. And they were selling them, to whoever, the government was selling them to whoever would buy them, and NC State bought some and set them up kind of along Hillsborough Street. My favorite part of this map is this building up here, which you may not be able to see that at home. It says Tottville, and what that was a daycare center that was set up for the children, the new children of these veterans that were living here on campus. And what I think must have been happening is, the veterans were almost exclusively men. That's what the GI Bill was for. Even though there were women veterans in World War II, because of essentially the sexism of the time, they could not take part in getting the GI Bill benefits until much, much later. So in the immediate post-war period, we're really talking about male GIs coming to school here. Like I said, starting their families. And I'm guessing, they would need a daycare because the wives were maybe off working. We know they weren't probably attending school as students, but we think they may have been off working, or a certain percentage of them. And so the university had to come up with a daycare center for the children. And so that's what Tottville was. And it's kind of a play on, there was another, we're not going to see this in a map, but there was another space on campus that was set up for married student housing, essentially. And it was called Vetville. So this is Tottville for the kids to be at during the day.
That's right.
And if you, I'm just going to throw this in. If you watched our previous stream, the February stream, where Virginia Ferris and I went over the early buildings on campus, we talked about Professor Pillsbury living in this area. He was one of the early horticultural professors. We think Tottville was probably Professor Pillsbury's house. And by the 1940s, Professor Pillsbury was no longer living there. He may have been deceased by that time. I don't remember. But the university needed to use that space for daycare. So that's what that is.
Yeah, that's so wonderful, Todd. I mean, that's I love this map, this drawing, because here, a seemingly rudimentary, straightforward kind of layout of this area of campus for temporary.
Yeah, it's very rectilinear.
Yeah,
through there.
yeah, temporary accommodation of non-traditional students, and part of this, a democratization theme to make higher education, higher technical education accessible to these new veterans returning from war and with their new families and so on. But it begins to say so much about what life may have been like on campus, and in terms of the student body, the different students with families and their kids becoming a part of the campus. And it has a kind of a contemporary, repercussions in terms of like housing. At this time, university was beginning to kind of actually think about the various types of students that they needed to accommodate. And with the rise in housing prices right now, and this is actually kind of an interesting period that maybe the university could begin to consider, in terms of possible ways that accommodating student needs.
Yeah. I'm sure there's all kinds of students that here in Raleigh with rents have been skyrocketing the last few years. It's just some of these apartments are probably out of range of where students could typically afford to live in.
Absolutely. And it's just to add to your comments, I mean, like you said, I think very likely this prefab housing, this was probably an innovative use of some surplus prefab housing that perhaps England gave to the United States as part of their repayments for U.S.
Possibly,
It's it would be very interesting to look at.
I got my eye out looking for documents about that.
Yeah, very much. This is probably like defense housing. That was also much of post-war housing construction was actually technology was invented during the defense housing needs. And so on, but also the use of keeping in mind that the development of the post-war single-family detached home as the building block of the post-war economy in the United States and abroad. The use of this detached single-family house type is also significant in terms of how the university was able to accommodate its non-traditional students. It can almost be seen as a type of early socialization of these young families to a particular type of domesticity before they went off to become consumers of home mortgages and so on as they graduated.
Right. Yeah. They were, at least in this space, they weren't going to put them in apartments.
That would be against Victorian moral standards.
And they couldn't afford to build a ranch house for everybody.
That's right.
So everybody gets to live in their own trailer here in Trailwood.
Yes.
And then when the other day when we were talking about this, how this space is kind of separated from other parts of campus where unmarried students are living. The dormitories south of the railroad tracks, with the railroad track kind of, those dormitories were built specifically for single students, and at this time period it was all men who were in those dormitories. So, there's a barrier of the railroad kind of separating that out. The other kind of concentration of dorms on campus at that time was way on the east side of campus on Pullen Road, Watauga and Welch and Gold, and then south of the railroad tracks, Bagwell, Beckley, and those dormitories. So this is way separated from those areas. And the other kind of the Vetville I was talking about is far to the southwest of this space here, and so that would kind of been remote compared to where the dormitories were for single students. So, I have to think there was some consciousness in deciding not to put single students next to married students.
Yes.
I don't, I'm not prepared to say exactly what that meant, but I feel like there were conscious decisions meant about that.
Again, very interesting.
Yeah.
It begins to talk about what could be next to each other and what could not.
Yeah.
In this, even though they were accommodating these new types of students.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, there had never been, high concentrations of married students on our campus, and I don't think in most U.S. campuses until the late 40s when all those students were going to school on the GI Bill. Okay, should we move on to the next map?
Yes, zoning. This is a
right.
type of,
kind of de facto zoning going on here.
Yes, that's happening. Very good.
Okay. We're going to go for the 1968 map then. Okay. Fear not, people. We're coming with new maps.
Yes.
Okay, and bear with us while we figure out how to get this in the frame of the screen. I think we need to. Go way down
That
here.
way.
Yeah, I think that's good there. Okay, this map dates from 1968, so we haven't really been going in chronological order here, but we are keeping within the time period 1945 to 1975. This is a real, for me, this may be the most interesting map that we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's interesting. There's kind of like 3 layers to this map. The first layer, which is what I think this map was originally created for, was to show where all the buildings were in 1968. So you got things like Burgaw Hall and Kilgore and Scott. This is Hillsborough Street, the railroad tracks. Now you get in Western Avenue. This is it's called Greek Court or Greek Village. It's called Greek Village now, but back in those days, it was called Fraternity Court, I think. So that's the first layer, to show you what was there in 1968. The second layer is to project ahead where the university was thinking about putting buildings probably in the next 10 years or so after 1968. So you've got, over here, you've got a big block of space here for a continuing education center. And sure enough, that is where the McKimmon Center was built, completed in 1976. Kind of closer to campus, or the core part of campus. You've got this building here, which is just number 6 on the map. That was supposed to be for education. Well, that's where Poe Hall was built, so education was put there. You may notice here, there's still Riddick Stadium in there, even though by 1968, Carter Finley Stadium had been built and the football games were taking place there. So those are 2 layers. But the third layer, which I kind of think may be the most interesting, is to document the acquisition of property or land over the course of the university's history up to 1968. So you've got things like this, gifts from Poland. Well, that is the original part of campus, which was a donation from a Raleigh real estate developer, R. Stanhope Pullen, donated that land to the state specifically for NC State to be created there. And so that was this space here and this space on the other side of the railroad tracks. And then we get all these other spaces kind of acquired really quickly, early in the university's history, like probably within the first, I'd say 25 years. So most of it was undeveloped for a long time, but you know, the university slowly grew out, as we saw in that first map, really kind of expanding to the south and to the west. So I'm saving my favorite part for last because I think this is really interesting. Part of those early land acquisitions was all this land through here, and I don't know if you can see that well on your screens, but it's like little individual plots. It's not big chunks of land like this here or this here that were acquired from one person. It's like little lots that were acquired from several people. And we've been able to determine that that was call it a village or a small community of African Americans that had been living there before the university acquired that space. And that the university acquired that space in between 1902 and 1905, primarily so that they can build Patterson Hall, which you can hardly see there with all the lines over it. They wanted to build Patterson Hall precisely there because that space was going to face the entrance of the fairgrounds, which at that period of time was across Hillsborough Street here. So if you think of, if you know kind of Raleigh geography, if you know where Horn Street intersects with Hillsborough Street, that was kind of the entrance to the fairgrounds there. So, and Patterson Hall is like right across Hillsborough Street from that. So the university acquired the space and displaced all the people that used to live there. We don't know precisely how many people live there. We think it's around 50. There were probably about a dozen buildings there. We don't even really know which lots those buildings were on. If there may have been some of those lots may have been vacant. Some of them had buildings on them. We don't know which was which. I'm still trying to figure out more about this community. You'll notice here, this little chunk of area was acquired from the NC Agricultural Society, and that was the organization that ran the fairgrounds at this period of time. To me, what it looks like was the NC Agricultural Society owned the fairgrounds, owned this space over here. They may have, at one time been kind of plotting these lots out here and selling them because some research I've been able to read about the fairgrounds and this organization that owned the fairgrounds was they were always strapped for money. They were always never had enough money. So you could see them, at various points selling land to kind of raise some money. So I don't have any proof of this yet, but that's kind of what I think was happening there. And the fairgrounds moved out here in 1873. They used to be in downtown Raleigh. They moved out here in 1873. So I think the kind of date span that this community existed is 1873 till 1905.
Okay.
And so we're hoping to find out more about that community, but that's about all we know of it right now. In the February stream that Virginia and I did, we talked a little bit about that community.
That's right. No, I think for me, this adds another layer to our land acknowledgement statements.
Yes.
So the land grants, like NC State, were not only built on the spoils of Western expansion and acquisition of Native American lands, but also, the sort of through contradictions of growth, acquiring and appropriating the lands and houses of African American neighborhoods, perhaps, in their growth. I think this map, it's interesting here that the lots are actually darker than the buildings that kind of came in. Kind of shows this, perhaps the sort of the process of acquiring those lots that the university at that time was dealing with. It seems like this map kind of speaks to that.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, what you're mentioning, the relationship of this community to the state fairgrounds and the university's relationship with the positioning of its buildings in relation to that. I think we'll come back to this towards the end as we wrap up in terms of the NC State's connection to the region and to the state. And I think the fairgrounds really stands for the larger state, and NC State being kind of this research node for agricultural and economic development, across the state, and that Hillsborough becomes kind of this mirror or this threshold between the relationship, the symbolic relationship between the larger region and this research center.
Exactly. The university's had a big presence at the state fair every year, I think, since it began. And from the very beginning, the university was doing extension and engagement outreach work with agricultural communities throughout the state from the very beginning, and then later engineering in the same context too. So there's so this gives us a little preview of that map. We're going to look at it.
Foreshadowing.
Right, so stay tuned. So we've been doing this an hour, but we've got a few more maps to go to.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
Again, bear with us off screen while we're changing maps. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
This one is kind of more architectural planning than maps, but it's very interesting nonetheless. So this is actually kind of a documentation of a space that never happened, but which a great deal of planning went into. In the 1970s, the university was looking at replacing the 1911 building with another building, which was going to kind of physically try to tie together the space of the Court of North Carolina off to the east, and with the space, the open space off to the west, which would be the Brickyard and the Gardner Arboretum. And so that's kind of what this is documenting. Sort of within the dotted lines, here's the old footprint of the 1911 building. Superimposed over that is this new building that they were thinking of. This would be the Court of North Carolina side. Over here would be Gardner Arboretum, and then beyond that, kind of off the plan, would be the Brickyard. This is a kind of a perspective sketch from the Court of North Carolina side. So if you think of yourself on the east end of the Court of North Carolina looking west, today you see the 1911 building, and I think Virginia is going to pop in the chat a link to a photo of that building. kind of blot out of your mind the 1911 building and, kind of conceptualize this new building there instead. And this building was also going to kind of academically tie things together because while it was called the General Academic Building, it was pretty much from the beginning envisioned to be space that would be occupied by what today is the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. Mm-hmm. At this time, it was still called the School of Liberal Arts. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In the early 1970s, the departments in that college were mostly split between Harrelson Hall, which no longer exists, but at that time it was right mm-hmm. off the Brickyard, mm-hmm. and Winston Hall, which is this building mm-hmm. on the mm-hmm. plan, and which would be mm-hmm. this building in the perspective. Yeah. So, mm-hmm. trying to kind of physically tie these spaces together, but also tie mm-hmm. that kind of spread out academic unit of liberal arts, or what became humanities and social sciences.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a wonderful perspectival sketch that you can see. It's very, dates this drawing quite a bit, this kind of curvilinear 1980s and the colors and so on. But essentially the purpose of this was to create a bridge between the Court of Carolina, this open space that was referred to as a square, almost a that you could easily pass through and would connect the Court of Carolinas with the Brickyard.
Yeah, and I have to wonder if this was like a plan mm-hmm. of that space with the walk-through space through there.
Yeah. So almost a public passage, an internal court through which students could easily pass through, so that from the humanities to the technical and fields, mm-hmm. there is a kind of a more smoother transition between those two courtyards. So again, trying to meld together these multiple courts into a more unified whole, still operating in the planning ideals of the university at this stage. You can see the DHL library here, the tower of the stacks there behind that, behind this general academic building.
GAB.
Yeah.
Which we were laughing. We were laughing earlier about the kind of arch design there, that reminiscent of the kind of Galleria type malls of that time period.
That period, absolutely. Postmodernism at its height.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to quickly add in here that that we talked about this earlier, where later in the post-war time period, the university is really kind of consciously starting to think about mm-hmm. how do we connect the mm-hmm. parts of campus mm-hmm. together, because it's there's a sprawl to it that we've already seen in some of the maps mm-hmm. that we've been talking mm-hmm. about. Mm-hmm. There's another explosion in growth mm-hmm. in the 1960s and 70s. Mm-hmm. In 1961, the enrollment was at around 6,100 students. Mm-hmm. And in 1973, it had basically doubled to 12,200 students. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, still kind of small compared to where we are today, but, mm-hmm. Doubling in a span of 12 years that's, pretty rapid growth, really. And, putting more strain on the facilities of the university. Mm-hmm. So, like we said, mm-hmm. in the end, this was never built. The 1911 building stayed the same. A few, I don't remember when it was 10 or so years ago. It got kind of another remodeling through it. I can tell you that I and many other people mm-hmm. walked right through it to get from one side to the other.
It does function this way to some extent. Yeah.
Right. So
it just doesn't have the.
It just doesn't have the open passage to it. And the money that was supposed to go to building this went instead to building Caldwell Hall, which connects Winston Hall to Tompkins Hall. And, those three buildings all together make up a sizable chunk of the humanities and social sciences program. So,
Yes. Yeah, very good.
okay, on to the last map. Again, bear with us while we change our maps here.
Yes.
This one we're going to step back again a little bit in time. Ariane, do you think you could zoom in some on that? Yeah, why don't
That's
you?
great.
That's probably good there. Thank you. Okay, this map called Properties of NC State College, which we think was made about 1950, but we wanted to use it to kind of show that already by this early post-war time period, the reach of the college had expanded way beyond Raleigh. Obviously, all parts of the state were kind of sending their, mostly young men to go to school here in Raleigh at NC State. But, so there's this kind of, gravitational force, I guess, coming into Raleigh. But, there is, a parallel direction too. Things are going out from Raleigh too, that are contributing to, really to the economy of the state. Initially to the agricultural economy, but then, later, including, the forestry part of the economy, and then engineering too. And so, we wanted to show this map to kind of represent that. Just a little bit to kind of orient you, like, there's Raleigh, Wake County. That's where the university is, and it says, the university has 650 acres as the campus, plus 2,850 acres that are research orchards and farms, also in Wake County. But there's, property held in lots of other counties too. A lot of that was involved in agricultural extension and agricultural research, and there's research farms really kind of all over the state. In the 1950s, a lot of that was, doing research on growing and harvesting and processing tobacco, because that was a big driver of the economy at that time, and really was through quite a bit of the 20th century. But there's also research stations where they're looking at kind of horticulture involving peaches and horticulture involving all kinds of different vegetables, and those are happening in various places around the state. The forestry program here at NC State has these school forests, many of which has had over time, and many of which still exist, such as Hoffman Forest right there in Onslow and Jones County, and it still exists. The university still holds that, or the Forestry Foundation, I think, technically holds that property. But it has been used by the College of Natural Resources for research in the past. I'm not sure how much of that is going on there right now. A little closer to home in Durham County was Hill Forest. That still exists, just north of Durham there. And I think Virginia is going to put in the chat a link to some photographs of Hill Forest. And she's also putting in the chat some of the photos of research farms. And then 4-H, has been a big part of agricultural extension, now cooperative extension, and there have been 4-H camps, like Camp Millstone down here in Richmond County. I think we've got some photos of that. We'll provide a link to.
Yeah, I think this is just such a powerful map and really represents what a land grant institution does, you know, in a state and beyond. In terms of like what happens on a campus doesn't stay on campus. This notion of multidisciplinary, developing habits of multidisciplinary cooperation and balancing humanities and sciences, those types of practices that the students were learning to do on campus during these years were really extended, and at least the hope was that those types of ideals would be extended across the university's operations throughout the state and the region. I have a feeling this map was probably in the chancellor's office, or was kind of a sort of something that they were it was useful in talking with the state legislature in terms of what the university is contributing to in terms of the operations across the state. But this map is also represented in the fairgrounds. I feel sort of like that's where it also kind of converges, which is really conceptualized as almost synonymous, especially during these years, with NC State as well in terms of its agricultural and operations and animal husbandry and scientific farming. Disseminating ideas of and practices of scientific farming across the state.
Interestingly enough, the one thing this map doesn't show is are the county offices of cooperative extension. By 1950, there were all 100 counties, I believe, had a extension office, and it's I don't know why those weren't on the map. Perhaps because the actual like real estate of those offices may have been owned by the county governments rather than NC State. But NC State had a presence in all those counties.
Yeah. Excellent.
Great.
Very good.
So that was our last map. Whew, that was
nice.
Fun.
Thank you, Tom.
And I'm looking at Virginia to see if there's any chat questions we need to answer. Okay. So I'm going to wrap us up here then. Just to let our audience out there know that I am conceptualizing a third campus map stream of unboxing special collections in which we look at later 20th century maps, and I'll probably focus on Centennial Campus for that one, I think. So stay tuned for that. I'm still kind of in the idea stage for that. But there's two unboxing special collections streams that are coming up in the next 2 months that I want to let everybody know about. On Thursday, October 20th at 3 p.m., some of my colleagues will be presenting Halloween Spooky Spectacular. And they are excavating some of the spookier and more supernatural inclined materials that we have in special collections. And I think one of the things they'll be showing about is like I don't think it's medieval period, it might be Renaissance period manual of witches. Is that right, Virginia? Do you remember that? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
And then on November 17th at 3 p.m., two of my colleagues will be talking about dyeing textiles, and they're going to take some recipes for dye, as the coloring agent that we have in some of our collections, and they're going to go over to the public science lab that we have here on campus and they're going to create some of these dyes and use them to dye some textiles. So that should be really interesting. And then I just wanted, to say that you can always contact us in Special Collections. Through our website, we have an online contact form, and Virginia is going to drop that into the chat too, so you can always get in touch with us that way to see anything that we've presented today or anything that we show in any of our Unboxing Special Collections episodes. And I just want you to know that that is possible. I think everything we showed today is not digitized, so you would need to come into the library to look at that. But we gave you some links in the chat that you could see some of the photographs that have been digitized. And Burak, I want to thank you for joining me. I think this has been great. I've certainly enjoyed it and learned a lot too. So thank you again.
Same for me. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Very enjoyable, and it's and I'll be looking forward to the next episode. As the campus moves towards a multinodal. And the challenges of maintaining a technologically advanced but cohesive society in a multinodal.
Yeah, well, and especially like when you've got a campus like Centennial Campus that's so far removed from the rest of campus.
The challenge. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody out there. And with that, I will say goodbye.